All right. So, um, I'm really excited because I'm going to change up the format for doing this now because I feel like I'm a better thinker when I actually sit and I'm not walking and being scared by other people. But, um, in today's video, what I want to talk about is something that's had a really it's had a really profound effect on the way that I'm approaching my life since I've turned 20, and it's the distinction between action and thought. I think more naturally I'm a better thinker than I'm an actor. Now that's very possibly just code for lazy, but thinking comes more naturally to me. I'm very good at sitting down and thinking through complex problems and understanding, the infinite different perspectives behind it. And that served me really well when I was in high school and when I was in, kind of lower education. And even in higher education, it served me well. But I realized that, I wasn't manifesting the things I wanted out of my life as a thinker. And so it really got me thinking, because I think something we often hear is that, you have to put yourself in a positive mindset, you have to put yourself in the right, you need to think about your highest self. And I was doing all of that. I was thinking a lot about who I wanted to be. And I'd figured out in my mind who I wanted to be and how I wanted to get there. And I built a plan and I'd done all those things. But I was sitting around one day and I was like, yo, I'm not any closer to being that person. And it was really frustrating, and I really had to consider why. And that was the moment where I realized that the reason was that while I was thinking through all of the things that I wanted to be, I wasn't taking action on them. Now, one of the reasons for that, I think, is because thinking can be dangerous in some ways, from what I've found. Because one of the things thinking does is that it gives you permission to quit. In the sense that if I can think through a complex problem, I've solved 80% of it. So why do the other 20? The problem is that 20% is what actually matters. Because knowing how to solve something is not the same as solving something. I can know how to change the oil in my car. But if I don't do it, that car is going to break down. Because the car don't care how much I know. Right? So, once I started considering the distinction between action and thought, it started changing my perspective on the two. Because the thing I started looking at, maybe another way to look at it that's resourceful that I've found is that action is wisdom, right? I think we often think of, or at least I often think of, wise people as prolific thinkers. They're very good at sitting and thinking and reasoning and articulating. But the thing is, I found a truly wise man is a man of action. Now, why is that? I think there's two reasons for that. The first reason is that when you are a man of action, you can, okay, let me backpedal and preface like this. Okay. Thought exists within the realm of potential. And I talked about this in my last video. And I think it's a really important idea. Thought opens us up to this higher dimension of that which could be. And that is so important. It's so important because it allows us to dream, right? When I think of complex things, I can kind of, or I can imagine what I could be. And that is so key because it lets us dream, it lets us imagine. The problem is that thought is regulated to the dimension of potential. In order for something to manifest in your life, though, you need to bring it from potential to reality. You have to actualize it. And I think true wisdom and growth, character growth, is that journey between, that transition between thought and action. That road between thinking of my higher self and acting out the things that the best version of me would actually do, that's growth, because that requires discipline, because that requires forethought, because that requires patience. Right? And that's where you actually grow as a person. So then, action can be thought of as wisdom. That being one of the big reasons. The other reason I think, though, is because when you act, you gain experience. And I believe experience is the currency of existence, right? It's the most valuable unit, most valuable basic unit of existence, experience, right? But when you act, I garner more and more experience. But through that experience, I'm introduced to new potentials, new realms of ideas, right? That's why people say traveling is so important. Go see a culture you've never seen because it'll open up your mind, right? That's what happened when the East opened its doors to the West, or vice versa, call it what you will. All of a sudden the West was flooded with this idea of the East, and people were taken to the next level of spirituality. Well, yeah, that makes sense because they went through this process of being the experience of traveling to the Orient opened up their eyes to realms of ideas that they never even considered, right? So the idea is that when you act, through experience, you garner the potential to think more. And when you think more, you can consider new ideas that you want to act out. And that, I think, is why action is actually akin to wisdom. See, and that might not seem like a major thing, but for me, that was a big changing point. Because I realized that to be wise was not to be a great thinker, but to be a great actor. And that in that action is where true wisdom can be derived, right? It's because of competence in another sense, right? Who do you think of as a wise person? You think of someone who's really wise as someone who knows what they're talking about. But how can you know what you're talking about if you haven't experienced it? Which brings me to my third point, which I think is that action is reality, right? Because I talked about the idea that if you act, you're translating. That's a fancy way of saying it, but really, you're moving from potential to reality, or you're moving from potential to that which is, and you're manifesting potential into what is in the world. And when you do that, you change reality, right? And that's so cool, because you start to become what you're imagining, because you're changing the way the world works around you. You're literally influencing reality, right? So I think, and you know what, there's something to be said about that in the sense of spirituality, and I'll say, here's why. Because I'm sure we've all heard kind of this idea, and I think maybe it was Kierkegaard, who I think was a psychologist. Don't quote me, I could be totally wrong on that. He was either a psychologist or a philosopher, but I think he was a psychologist. And the idea is that, we've often heard the idea you want to bring your actions in line with your thoughts and your feelings, and that's what we call integration. When your actions and your feelings and your emotions, boom, they come in one line, and then you can transcend. I guess maybe that's what that imagery is for. Like, you bring yourself together and then you can go up, to heaven or a higher sense of being. But there's, you have to kind of stop there and consider, why is action even part of that trifecta? And I think it's because ancient people and cultures, and it doesn't even have to be ancient, I think we all intuitively realize that when you act in line with how you feel and what you believe, you become something better. Now, why? I think I've solved it, and I'm still working on it, but I think, as far as I've figured, what it is that through action, you actualize your potential. Here's a more poetic way to say it, you become that which you can be. And this all comes back to that self-loathing video I talked about, because I talked about, I'm not everything that I could be, and that causes me, bouts of, I wouldn't call it depression, because, people actually suffer from depression, but moments of real darkness. And I've noticed that those moments are the ones where I'm farthest from, or rescinding, moving away from that sort of integration. So I've found that, and it's a very, the distinction between action and thought has had a really potent influence in my life in these past couple months, because what it's forced me to do is to act twice as much as I think. That's actually like a life rule I set for myself. And as I've done that, it's been really interesting, because things have started manifesting themselves in my life. There's been this magical opening of gates, but it's not really a magical opening of gates. It's like, what else would happen, dude? Now I'm maximally trying to output information and content and literature and science. I'm just trying to push myself to do things, even if I do them badly. Because even in doing them badly, I move from potential to reality. And I think maybe to end it off, that's the last point I want to make. That I think the reason we don't do it, so then, knowing all this, I think we intuitively do know it. I think maybe I intuitively knew it, at least I just wasn't articulating it or acting on it. So why? Why would I not act on that? Here's what I think. I think that the reason we don't like to actualize our thoughts is because it forces us to come face to face with our own inadequacies. For me, it was the fear of failure. So I really had to change my relationship to failure, and that'll be another video, I think. But what I had to do was I had to stop being scared to fail. Because my fear of failure was letting me use thinking as an excuse to not act. Right? And here's a really great, pretty simple example of it. It's like, I can say all day that I can spit game, that I could get any girl I want. Until I go do it, I'm not actually gonna know if I have game. Right? Because I don't know how to play out in the real world. I don't know how I'm inadequate. I don't know where I'm not good enough, because in my mind, I'm perfect. Right? I'm only thinking of the best case scenario, or I'm only thinking of the worst case scenario, or I'm thinking of the middle scenario, but what the hell do I know? What do I know what will actually happen in the world? So when you act, when you actualize, you risk failing yourself. And maybe that's why I don't act sometimes, or we don't act, or I don't act. Because I'm so scared that I'll fail myself. So I've had to change my relationship to what it means to fail, and to change my association of worth, self-worth, with success. But, like I said, that's another video. So I just wanted to get that up, man. Action versus thought. Act twice as much as I think. It's my new rule. Alright.